We're joined today by our guest, Ray LaMura, and Ray is the president of the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. And the Cable Telecommunications Association has been doing some really great work across the Commonwealth. They've been really engaged in looking at ways to expand access to high-speed internet, especially in rural areas. As you know, they provide the wire to the door, but they also do a number of other elements too, in looking at working with our utilities like our electric co-ops and others to find opportunities to do even more to expand that broadband coverage. And I believe it's one of the most important issues that the state faces in growing our economy and making sure that our students have that access to high-speed internet so that they can not only perform in the classroom, but can excel in the classroom. And we know we have those connections at schools. It's our job to make sure we find those connections for all homes out there across the Commonwealth. And Ray has really been at the forefront and a leader in looking at how do we address these issues? How do we make sure we get that network of broadband across the Commonwealth? So, Ray, I want to welcome you this morning and thank you so much for all you've done at the state level and also what you help us do at the federal level, because for me it's one of my priorities in Congress to make sure that we have that service of high-speed internet across the state. So thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Congressman. I'm glad to join you.
Well, listen, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us. I want to get your perspective on how you view the issue of high-speed broadband into unserved areas of not only Virginia but across the nation, and why you think it's important, why you think it should be a priority, and what are some of the key services broadband can provide to individuals and businesses. Sometimes I think people understand maybe what connectivity is, but don't understand truly what the speed element provides to them and what they can do both for their children as students, but for their businesses and other opportunities there.
All right. Well, Congressman, that's a great question, and I think one of the key words that you used is to focus on the unserved. And you know, we in many parts of the Commonwealth have access to high-speed broadband, but the unserved are really at a position where they're losing out. You mentioned the students. The education is driven by access to the internet today, and we think that getting access to more students throughout the Commonwealth is priority. And we have to focus on making sure that state resources are devoted towards that goal. There are a number of programs that are out there to help jumpstart that initiative. But you talk about one of the benefits of broadband. Students, this is how we learn today. It is through access to the internet. When I grew up, I had the encyclopedia on the wall in the den. I'd pull that down. That doesn't happen anymore. It is through the internet that students have access. It's how we work today. It's people when their internet is down, they're stymied at work. So it is how sales get transacted, and it is how businesses continue to do their research and make investments. It's how households operate today. Home security systems, entertainment. Staying connected with family members through different mediums, through either Facebook or other videos, it is all driven through the internet. Another key element that is really exciting, and a number of our companies are making strides in this space, is telehealth. So being able to access health care from home. And that is critical to have high-speed internet to do that. It is how we shop today. So, the infrastructure of broadband is critical, and those who are unserved are really at a true disadvantage. And it's important that, again, the focus be on unserved. And I'm proud that as a member of the Broadband Advisory Council appointed by the governor, that is the key focus, is focused on the unserved.
No, Ray, listen, I agree. I think making sure that that's where the focus is critical. And folks, this is the John Fredericks Show. This is Rob Wittman. I'm co-hosting or guest hosting, I should say, for John this morning, and we're joined by Ray LaMura, who is president of the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, and Ray has been a true leader in this area. And Ray, I wanted to drill down a little bit more on the idea of unserved. We talked today a lot about speed, and we know with today's applications and how our wireless devices work, how our smartphones work, how our tablets work and computers work, that the element of unserved is also related to speed. And I think that the definition of unserved needs to be that if your speed currently is less than 25 megabytes per second download speed, and I'll get into a little geek speak here, or 3 megabytes per second upload speed, then anything less than that really doesn't allow people, as you talk about students, businesses, and others, to have the capability that they need. So I wanted to get you to comment a little bit on the speed element of the definition of unserved. And you talked also about, how do we build out those networks? I wanted to get you to talk a little bit too about there are some government-owned networks out there that have not worked. They have failed, and what they end up doing is costing governments and customers much more than what it would have done if there was partnerships with existing providers there. So I wanted to get your perspective on the speed issue, and then a little bit about the current state of government-owned networks in Virginia.
Sure. Well, the speed issue is interesting. So you mentioned the 25 and 3 speed issue. That was a speed recognized by former FCC Chairman Wheeler. It becomes somewhat of a strange point, however, because the FCC, out of one side, is talking about speeds of 25 and 3. But at the same time, in the same office at the FCC, they're handed out over $96 million to one of the telephone providers here in the Commonwealth to provide broadband at speeds of 10 and 1.
Yes.
So there's somewhat of a miscommunication that's gone on at the FCC that's creating a lot of confusion and maybe potentially creating a lot of waste. If the new speed is at 25 and 3, but they've handed out $96 million to companies to build a network of 10 and 1, then they've already built a network that's underserved.
Yes.
And that's a problem. So that needs to be corrected. Now, the members of the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association all provide speeds that blow away the 25 and 3, absolutely blow them away. And I think there needs to be recognition that other technologies may have to be used in order to reach all parts of Virginia. We have a very difficult topography. We've got the mountains, we've got a lot of water, and we've got a lot of valleys. And that makes it difficult for hardwire broadband to be brought to every corner. So other technologies are going to have to be utilized, and making sure that they are able to comply with those speeds, as you suggested, is important. Also, the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative uses the speed of 10 and 1 to recognize what the FCC has done, so it's not wasting taxpayer dollars. Yes. And speaking of the waste of taxpayer dollars, you asked that I speak about government-owned networks and those that may have failed, and I really try to be a person who more speaks to the positives, but unfortunately we did have an incident in Southwest Virginia that has wasted over $80 million in taxpayer resources. I typically would not encourage or recommend someone read a state auditor's report, but if someone is looking for some light summer reading, the audit report on the Bristol Utility Authority, quite frankly, is a page-turner. It really speaks to a lot of problems that have gone on in a government-owned network here in the Commonwealth, and this report was just done in 2016. Where this is an organization that took over $132 million from the government and built a network that didn't reach the unserved, but reached those who were served already. Sadly, it was just sold for $50 million.
Wow.
Again, Henny taxpayers an $80 million loss just from one small community in Southwest Virginia. And to kind of put that in perspective, the Commonwealth of Virginia has budgeted only $4 million each of these next 2 years for a total of $8 million for its Virginia Telecommunications Initiative. And that's for the entire state. So what happened in Southwest Virginia is very unfortunate. And I think there needs to be a lot of lessons learned before any locality looks at going into this type of operation. And really, it should be a public-private partnership that is, expressed and really delineated by the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative and the Virginia Tobacco Commission, who started their program as well.
Well, Ray, I think those are very important points as we debate how do we best utilize a combination of dollars. You pointed out that Virginia puts dollars into it. The federal government recently put $630 million into building out in these unserved areas. I think those things are going to be the key. Ladies and gentlemen, we're joined by Ray LaMura, who is the president of the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, and talking about broadband. And Ray brings a great realm of experience, both in the public policy realm, but also in how to best, as he pointed out, build out a network into these unserved areas. He talked about using different technologies, too. This is really technology agnostic, I would say. It's about how do we use technology that best reaches all areas of Virginia. Some of it will be through wire, some of it will be wireless, some of it will be satellite, but nonetheless, we want to make sure we are spending dollars in the right way. And Ray, as you point out, Virginia's leading the way in promoting these public-private partnerships to get high-speed broadband to truly, as you point out, unserved areas. I want you to talk a little bit about how you think we can best leverage private investment, how our cable companies, as well as other telecommunications companies, are looking at where they make investments and the critical role that plays in broadband deployment. Making sure we're using those dollars to the maximum utility possible, I think, is key.
Sure. I'd be glad to speak to that, Congressman. The public-private partnership, in our mind, really makes the greatest sense. To us, it doesn't make sense for a locality to start from ground zero and go it alone, to have to hire experts in engineering telecommunication services, to hire engineers to go out and repair telecommunication services, to hire customer service representatives to be on call 24/7. It makes more sense for a locality to leverage its assets. And what I mean by that is the infrastructure they have, either utility poles or easements or attachments to buildings even, that they can partner and extend the services of a company that is investing in its own community. And that's one thing I think people often forget is, we are in the communities. We go to school with everyone, or we go to church there with everyone. We're part of the community, so it makes sense to help lift the private sector to extend those services, who have the customer service, who has the expertise in enhancing broadband and has the expertise in repairing issues when those things go down. And I think one thing people often forget, that broadband is not like water and sewer. It's not like you put in a pipe underground and you don't have to touch it for 50 years. This type of technology is enhanced almost every 18 months. The speed that goes on continues to be enhanced continuously. And it takes engineering to do that, and it takes that knowledge that goes in that. So it doesn't make sense to duplicate it in a government form and build a network where you have got the experts who are already investing in the community. And that kind of speaks to economic development of how the companies want to be investing in Virginia. And so we think it's important that the public-private partnerships exist. And localities can also look at policies and procedures that may be barriers that are slowing things down. We're working with the home builders today to make sure that homes don't get built so far off of the road where they remove themselves from a count where density issues come into play. We're trying to make sure that rights of way access and attachments to utility poles make sense, because we want to have these investments because this technology drives so much. And as we kind of talked about, just really touched on the handful of things that broadband can do. So I think I handled most of the question. That maybe you can encourage me with some other direction.
Well, no, I think that covers the very important connections that we have and how decisions are being made. But I wanted to get you maybe to give a little more elaboration on how these public-private partnerships help government share the risk of building a network. There's always some risk involved there. It's a business investment, but how do these public-private partnerships help in assuring that taxpayers' dollars are going to be used to the maximum efficiency possible? I wanted to get your perspective on that.
Sure. Well, by nature in itself, the business community and our companies are trying to maximize efficiency on a consistent basis. So that is our mode of operation is maximizing efficiency, because we have shareholders that we are responsible to. But we also, good corporate citizens, and we want to make sure that these investments in the community make sense. Going back to the issues out in Bristol, really to be handing the taxpayers a loss of $80 million and hooking up ostensibly no new customers really did not achieve what was desired by all the agencies that made those investments. And these agencies are looking for activity and investment that makes sense. And that's why we're seeing a lot more encouragement and direction towards these public-private partnerships, because it doesn't place all of the taxpayers' resources at risk. The private sector, through the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative and the Tobacco Commission, are making investments themselves, often 2 or 3 times more than what the government is bringing to the table. So the private sector is making capital investments in Virginia that really kind of speaks to the way our companies want to operate here and be a great corporate citizen.
I think those are great connections that you make, Ray, between what government has a role in doing, what business has a role in doing, and how we make sure that the relationships are what they need to be to get resources not only well placed, but make sure that they're done in an efficient way. You alluded a little bit earlier, too, about the critical nature of building out capacity, and that you don't have overlap. In other words, that you're not competing against existing facilities, because we want them to survive too. You don't want public dollars to be used in creating inefficiencies by overbuilding. So want to get your perspective on why you think overbuilding is so detrimental to what needs to happen for the future of broadband high-speed internet access in Virginia.
Well, I think if you're speaking to a government overbuild,
yes.
It actually sends the wrong message to any company looking to come to a community, and it sends the wrong message to the company that is there. If for the first point, a company looking into a town or a city that's building a network, they're seeing the government trying to compete with the private sector. And they have to say to themselves, wait a second, are we in the business where the government may decide they want to compete against us and use taxpayer resources to compete against us? Maybe that's not the location for us to go. On the second point, when companies have made investments, it almost sends a chilling effect back to that investing company of, wait a second, why should we invest more here when our own tax dollars are being used to compete against us? So it sends a chilling effect on economic development. And I think officials need to be mindful of that perspective of how businesses kind of view these government-owned networks when they pop up. It almost sends the reverse message of economic development.
And it does, and I think too it has potentially catastrophic negative effects, because, as you point out in Bristol, if you have a government-run system that fails, and it has put pressure on the privately run system to the point where it either can't function or fails, then the citizens there are finding themselves without any internet service or inferior internet service or less than the amount of coverage that they had before because of the inefficient deployment of resources. So I think you bring up some really great points about what the detrimental effects are there of not making the right decisions. Ray, I wanted to get you real briefly. We have just a few minutes left, but you alluded to the VCTA program, which is the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative, and what's happening across the state. I know the governor, as part of his advisory commission now, too, is aggressively pursuing an objective of trying to cover the state in a 10-year period. For what they call reasonable broadband coverage. You're not going to get it to somebody that's on way off the grid, but to be able to do that. So give us an idea about what the VCTA program is about and how it's unfolding. As you said, the legislature did double the amount of money in it, but it's still only at $4 million a year for the next 2 years.
Right. Well, the VCTA program was started just a couple of years ago, and I'm proud to say that the VCTA was the leading advocate for its creation, but I have to recognize Delegate Kathy Byron and Senator Frank Ruff for their efforts to get this across the finish line, and also replicate this at the Virginia Tobacco Commission. But what its point to do is, again, make sure that this public-private partnership exists, and it's a unique program that we're all very excited about, and it's created a number of successes already. And down in Gloucester, we were very pleased to see, Cox Communications would be the beneficiary of investments, and they had a tremendous success story down there.
Yeah,
it's just again gets you down the road where it makes business sense, where a build before would not occur. And that's all this is to do. It is to help extend the service, help it get farther down the road. But $4 million is not a lot, and I know the governor is trying to do more in this space. And we're very pleased to see, and this again was legislation driven by Delegate Kathy Byron, to create a chief broadband advisor, and the governor has created a new advisor, Evan Feynman, whose task it is to get a plan in place to achieve that 10-year goal. And what they're doing is they're bringing all the stakeholders now, even reviewing the new guidelines for 2019, and bringing all the stakeholders to the table to make sure that they can make this an even better program going forward. Well, what were the lessons learned from the first time or first round of distribution? And so we have just gone through this. We're in the comment period right now back to DHCDB. I think all parties are very encouraged about making this a great program, and that can be replicated in Washington and needs to be replicated in Washington because of just the proper sense of taking care of taxpayer resources and also leveraging the expertise of the private sector to go farther. And it is that combination that will, I think, help drive greater success in expansion to the unserved.
Ray, I thank you for joining us today, and you are exactly right. Using the VCTA program as a model at the federal level where you are engaging and leveraging the private sector and their resources, the state, the federal government, everybody that's part of the policy and the funding for this, I think is absolutely key. So, Ray, I really appreciate your leadership. Thanks so much for joining us today on the show and giving us your perspective about the things that we need to do to make sure that we get the state entirely covered with high-speed broadband. So thanks again.